Welcome to So What, the podcast where we talk to experts about one thing in their field that they think is crucially important and that they would argue everyone should know about. I'm Madhurima.
And I'm Sean. And today we're talking to Kathalene Razzano, who teaches at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and has written extensively on welfare, family, and especially paternity using the lens of cultural studies. Today she'll be talking about these questions of paternity and the evolution of the argument that, quote, children need fathers. Katy's one of my oldest academic colleagues. We've had decades of conversations, often while attending academic conferences together. I think we went to my first conference together. I'm not sure it wasn't yours, and after hearing a colleague elaborate on a thorough theoretical analysis of an emergent cultural object, the first question we would often look to each other and ask is, so what? So it is really great to have Katy on today to be able to ask her that question. Welcome, Katy.
Hi, thank you both for having me. So I'm here to talk to you about the idea that kids need fathers. And I started thinking about this idea nearly 25 years ago, around when Sean and I first met, as I was doing research for a book on daytime television talk shows, when I noticed there was a subgenre that started to emerge with increasing frequency. And these were paternity-themed episodes, which use DNA testing to prove or disprove paternity. And so I was intrigued by the development because I have an interest in popular culture and families. So I started thinking about how these paternity tests were being used. So why are we asking the question? Who is asking it? What are the material and non-material gains? And what are the dangers? But most interesting were the tensions and the contradictions, these conflicts inherent in search for paternal truth. And we see this on the talk show. So in identifying the biological father, what we initially saw was a seemingly altruistic move to get justice for mothers and hold fathers accountable. But we also witnessed a test that took the power to name the father away from the mother. It comes with one of the key tensions of the resurrection. If he's the father, can he still be a, quote, responsible father and be a check in the mail once a month? Or he has the option of being a full-time dad. If he's not the father, he has the choice to maintain his relationship with the child or to just walk away.
And this is like if there's a kid that they already have been living with.
Right.
So say you have a relationship with.
Right. You've raised the kid for 8 years, and now the test says you are not the father. But in the eyes of the child, is he any less the father the day before the test than the day afterwards? And actually, we're going to see that the state sometimes says, yes, you're still the father, even after paternity is disproven. But for all their efforts, the welfare and justice systems can compel a man to pay child support, the financial, but they have yet to be able to compel a man to be a social father.
You sent us this article that you'd written, was it 10 years ago maybe? And I thought about how relevant it still seemed. And one of the things you pointed out was that there's all this conversation about how the presence of the father can add to the kid's life, but the mother is always seen like she can only hurt the child.
Yeah, well, she's always insufficient.
Yeah.
Right.
Not trustworthy either. It's
right. Yeah. So one of the tensions of the test itself is she may be there on the stage, saying, yes, I know he's the father. I'm 100% sure he's the father. I wasn't with anyone else. But
right.
The test will tell us. And so it takes all claim, about determining the father away from the mother, which for better or for worse, we should add for centuries, maybe millennia, that was a mode of women's economic mobility, to be able to claim the child of that guy. Maybe it's the other guy, but I think my child and my life will be more secure with this one.
Right.
Sure.
I'm not saying, in any kind of ethical way, but these were the choices women had.
And that's taken away with the paternity test.
Right.
So you said about the talk shows, they were so dramatic. And if they were, they weren't memes then, but I feel like thinking about it now, those moments would be intensely reproduced.
I mean, I think Sean even sent me once. It was the image of Maury Povich and Darth Vader. And Maury Povich was saying to Darth Vader, "You are the father."
So one of the things you point out, Katy, is that I think it's the Montel Williams clip that you talk about, where Montel Williams takes on the role of a legal arbiter, even.
Yes. And I think it's from 2002. And it's an 18-year-old young man and a 16-year-old young girl. And their names are Richard and Annie. And Richard has denied Annie's baby. And the test comes in, and Montel is like, this is 99.99%, your child. And he kind of looks to Annie and it's like, you can take, and he waves the test results. You can take this down to the courts and get him on child support. And he looks to Richard and he says, and I hope she does. And I hope you, if you never even see your child a day in his life, I hope that she makes you pay, or, something along those lines, so that there is that idea that fatherhood, you should be in his life, right? But at the very least, we can make you pay.
Right.
What I think is really important for people who aren't familiar with how paternity and the welfare system operates, the other thing that your article really helps to kind of illuminate is that it isn't actually the situation where she takes that down to the office and then he gives her a check, right? What's sort of maybe not everyone understands is that the state is sort of the intermediary here.
Yes.
As a part of the Welfare Reform Acts in the 90s.
Right. The Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act of 1996 mandated paternity testing. If a father was not named already, they would seek to adjudicate a father. And
on the welfare application.
On welfare applications. And so that generally would involve DNA testing. And this is because the state wants to identify another source of income for the family. Right. And so what was happening in the 90s and in the early 2000s is, one, the testing became cheaper. There was funding through federal and state to do these tests. Initially, they have since withdrawn the funding for agencies to do the testing. But initially, it was state funded. You would do the test so that they could garnish wages if they needed to. They had somebody there. Now, the interesting twist, and I think that's what Sean's referring to, is that the states at the time were allowed to take that child support money that came in and to put it back into their own welfare coffer as a repayment for the welfare that they've already paid for the child.
So in effect, the paternity test is helping the state. It's not about actual, true additional support for the mom.
Well, so that's how it was working initially. But I think that got some public attention and there was a bit of backlash. So I think now portions of it will go directly to the family. Sometimes all of it will go directly to the family. But that was one of the moves that was being made in that legislation and in these responsible fatherhood and healthy marriage programs.
So when Montel is sort of waving this thing around in that particular episode, he's basically not talking about the mother getting the money from the father. She's talking about the mother helping the state get the money from the father, and also so that she can get money from the state by telling them who the father is. It's a wild situation that doesn't get portrayed necessarily in those moments on these shows.
And when we start understanding that connection between the definition of needs, responsibility, and best interest of the child, those were kind of my entry points to how I started not just looking at the talk show, but then also I noticed that those were themes that kept emerging. And so then part of the project that was to say, all right, where else is the paternity test being used? Okay, well, it's mandated in this welfare reform. It's used in a connection to the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act. It's used in child support enforcement programs. And so I went to those spaces to look at how needs and responsibility are are discussed, are presented to us. And, you're going to find consistently family here is heterosexual. It's always the father. We're looking for the father. It's patriarchal. Fathers are there for discipline, to give them confidence, to provide economic security. And moms are there to care.
Yeah.
Right.
And you point out that this narrative of what a father brings to the family, that's been around for a while. I mean, for sure, that's what comes up in the Moynihan Report.
Right.
We're talking about almost 40 years before the talk shows we're talking about.
And this is a report meant to inform U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty. It was prepared by Johnson's Secretary of Labor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, which is why we call it the Moynihan Report. But we get a better sense of its outlook from the actual title, which was The Negro Family, A Case for National Action.
Yeah. I mean, for the Moynihan Report, it was, I think they called it, the kind of opening refers to a crisis of race relations in the United States. And crisis actually is going to be one of these words that will come up over and over again. Fatherhood crisis, families in crisis. So crisis is this word that's used. But the thing that had everybody in a panic was that at that time, about a quarter of all births to African American women were to unwed women, right? They were out of wedlock.
Right. It must be said, Moynihan was a Democrat. He was liberal, but he got a lot of critique for this report. I've seen a clip of Ta-Nehisi Coates mentioning that it was never intended for wide distribution.
And this is 1965 when this was released. 1965 was the year that, so basically the year after Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act is just on the table as well. So
right,
yeah,
right,
and if his aim was to try and find why it is that Black Americans were economically disadvantaged, this is a way that he points to the family. Though I think they do mention like legacies of slavery, but that that it has to do fundamentally with the family. And I find it fascinating because I had read that Toni Morrison's novel Beloved is in some ways a response to the Moynihan Report, as a way of trying to figure out what it means for a mother during slavery. Like, where does that where does the fascination with the nuclear family come from? Where was that possibility? And of course, all these legacies of of something like slavery have to do with the systematic destruction of families.
right.
But then we pull that thread all the way through. Now we're talking about the talk shows in the 2000s, but we're also talking about more recent understandings and casting of the family.
And in fact, there's a book that was written after my piece, I think like 2019, around there. I think it's called Paternity, The Elusive Search for the Father. She does a really good job of tracking paternity. She kind of looks at it internationally, but also the way in which paternity is mobilized historically and currently to determine citizenship.
Oh, right.
Right?
Sure.
And how the approach to paternity and citizenship, fatherhood is not the same as it is in welfare systems.
Right.
She does a good job kind of tracing some of the history of this crisis of fatherhood. So there are these moments that kind of start even before Moynihan, but
right.
For us, this reinsertion of the father into a family because of social decay, that fatherlessness is the reason for this social decay.
Project 2025, I think, helps to bring this up to date in a way, because that I think helps us to see the contemporary resonance of this set of conversations in ways that it might not be directly apparent when you just watch Montel.
Yeah. So in the foreword to Project 2025, the president of the Heritage Foundation, one of the architects of Project 2025, says there is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of the father.
Jeez.
And he says that so many of the problems government programs are designed to solve but can't are ultimately problems created by the crisis of marriage and the family.
Wow.
And then he kind of concludes that bit with, if current trends continue, we are heading towards social implosion. Fundamentally, what we're seeing is the reliance on the mythologization of that ideal past.
Right.
That there was a mythic past where the traditional family created a stable society. Everybody knew their place.
That's key. That's key.
Right?
Yeah.
And things worked smoothly. Everybody was happy.
Right. Trains ran on time.
Right. Low crime, your kids could go out and play and
Sure.
but if we look historically, that has never been true.
So there's this podcast that you pointed us towards, or an episode of a podcast in which J.D. Vance is speaking to Eric Weinstein.
Yeah.
This is from 2020. So before Vance is the political powerhouse we think of right now, but he's written the Hillbilly Elegy, and those questions of how the family is going to fix it really comes strongly through that episode or in that conversation.
When that podcast became infamous, because that was the podcast where J.D. Vance and Weinstein talk about the role of postmenopausal women.
Sure.
And rightly, that got, a lot of backlash. Like, oh, this is what postmenopausal women are supposed to do. And
these are, they're two experts on the topic, obviously.
Yes.
Two men in their 30s.
We should definitely be listening to these two men is who we should be listening to.
Yes. But for me, the scarier part of what Vance was doing is making an appeal to the family in a way that talked about the stresses of trying to manage family and work. And he's speaking to some of the challenges, right? So he uses the example of his wife. She had the baby just, I think, a few months before she was supposed to start a clerkship for John Roberts, a big deal. And so they had to kind of figure out childcare. And then that's when her mom, who was a university professor, took a sabbatical and was able to go and help her with childcare after the child's birth. But for Vance, and then also for Weinstein, the discussion is also about something like, if you're going to have a strong and productive society, it's about the babies, right? You have to have a society that is actively reproducing its members biologically.
Right. And this is another crisis. Another crisis is that the coasts are apparently not having enough. They're not having enough babies.
Right. And one of the things to sort of note in the way that this discourse is getting taken up both here and in Project 2025 is that we aren't, there's a lot of different formations in which babies could be raised.
Right.
And there are a lot of families that have babies now. Some of them are having their babies taken out of their homes naked in the middle of the night and zip tied. We're not talking about babies. We're talking about a particular kind of baby here and a particular kind of family that is valuable. And that's part of the subtext that's not getting illuminated here.
So Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, he says that the foundation of the fascist myth is in the patriarchal family. And so there's always within fascist discourse the idea of this traditional family with very traditional gender roles. So it's a mythologized family, which is what Vance is doing, because he's describing his family's own struggle under what he calls hyper neoliberal capitalism to be able to spend time with your kids. And I think that's something that people resonate with. But the idea, right, we come back to this idea of the mythologized family. And Jason Stanley says that is like a foundational principle in fascist politics. is this traditional patriarchal family, because the father of the family is connected to the father of the nation. So the
Right.
strong leader of the nation is like a strong patriarch.
Right.
And so we need strong men,
Yeah.
obedient women, and many children.
Right. Whose
And
paternity we can't turn to the mothers to determine.
Right.
so I want to just ask one last question here, because I think it's part of what you see in this conversation about Vance, which is that the right has occupied the
Yes.
discussion of the family,
Yes.
right? And so what can you see as a sort of productive way for those on the left, those in progressive spaces, those who have any interest in anti-fascist vision of what the family looks like? What do you see as the thing that we should be doing, or the position we should be taking, or just the work that should happen?
Family is the unit in and through which we know the world. And so I think right, we need to start talking about family, but being intentional and reclaiming it to say, this is my family. When you all are talking about family, this is my family. I
Right.
made this family up of my same-sex partner, our adopted kids, my extended network. It's about care.
Right.
And it's reframing this discussion about care. And I think that in part, kind of circling back to the beginning, what paternity shows us is that even when we find a biological father, we're not meeting these kids' needs. We are not meeting the needs of children by finding the father. And so I think the real question then is, if we're interested in this idea of the best interest of the child, if we're thinking about what kids need, well, kids actually need health care,
Right.
right? What kind of options can we provide for them? Does it come back to the state? Does it come back to civic organizations? These are conversations that we can have. But so long as we come back to this idea that fatherlessness is why these kids are adrift and deviant,
Right.
we never will get to, okay, this hasn't worked. How else might we do this?
If there is a crisis, it seems to absolutely be a crisis of care and empathy,
Yes.
rather than anything that's pinned to one kind of body over another.
Right. Right.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about paternity. Clearly, there's so much around the idea of fatherlessness that we need to unpack and work our way into. So one of the things that we have been doing, or one of the things that we do with our guests, is that we ask, this is clearly an area of an expertise. We've been talking about things that you've studied for a while, that you're a scholar in, that you have a lot of insightful things to say about. But if there was if there was another thing that is not at all something that you're an expert on, but you think you may have wanted to talk about anyway, what would that thing be?
And I talked to Sean about this earlier in the summer when he was talking to me about the podcast, and I said, I've really been interested in Facebook Marketplace. And it was spurred on, and it might even still be available if anyone's interested, by maybe like a 3 foot by 4 foot painting of, think, hyper masculine Fabio type body, but
Sure.
like I think he's just kind of like in the loincloth with Nicolas Cage's head, and it's called Adonis. And I think for like $300, it could be yours.
And you're not
And
interested in this as a place to buy things. It's more of the spectacle, right? You don't go
both.
shopping necessarily.
What I what I really love about it is that I actually have found things that I really love that are unusual. So I have thought about, right, the circulation of secondhand goods. What is it that other people either don't want, or that they have repurposed, or, so what are the things that come to populate
Right.
Facebook Marketplace? Just has me thinking about the circulation of goods, mass production, the hauntings of particular objects and the histories attached to them that we may know or never know.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Katy.
Thanks
We
for having
really
me.
appreciate that we've been talking today about fatherlessness, paternity, and how that has been leveraged really for purposes different than what really kids need. Thanks for being here. I am Madhurima.
I'm Sean, and you can follow my other writing and broadcasting at breakingculture.substack.com. The music for the show was composed for us by Chris Stokes. You've been listening to the podcast So What?